Welcome to this webinar on multimedia accessibility, including key considerations for developers. We're going to be covering the following 8 success criteria. They are primarily focused with non-text content, that is images by and large, and then we move on to proper multimedia content such as videos, audio streams, and when they're combined as well. So moving straight on, the very first WCAG success criteria, 1.1.1, is concerned with non-text content. That is because the web is a very visual medium, and it's important that visual media is made accessible to people who cannot perceive it. So the W3C, they describe this success criteria as being all non-text content that is presented to the user has a text alternative that serves the equivalent purpose. And I've just left the second part in, except for the situations listed below. On the official guidelines, that goes into a bit more detail about specific use cases such as capture, which are used widely in forms, and we'll touch upon that in a separate forms webinar. There are a few other use cases as well, but in this webinar, we're just going to be covering the very common uses and implementations of this success criteria. So why is it important to cover non-text content in this way? Well, not all users can perceive content visually. Some users will be blind, have very low vision, and they will not be able to see the screen or not see it very well, and they may rely on screen reading software to read images out to them. Some users may have images turned off for bandwidth reasons, others may be experiencing network issues and images will not load for them. So in all these cases, it's really useful that there is a text alternative to images. Now, a lot of information is conveyed graphically, so icons and buttons are a very common example, and charts and graphs are widely used as well. Images are often used decoratively, of course, and it's important that whilst these add some cosmetic value to a web page for sighted users, they add very little value to the content. So they should be set up so that they can be ignored by assistive technologies such as screen readers. And we'll go on to look at some specific examples of each of these in the coming slides. So here's an example of non-text content, an image that contains information. Now, in this case, the text we can see, up to 7% direct debit discount, etc., is embedded directly within the image. That is not available as separate text on the page. So that is an example of an image that contains information, and that information should be made accessible to screen reader users who otherwise would not be able to access that. An example of some decorative content. So in this case, the image is purely adding some visual decoration to the page. It serves no functional purpose, so it's not acting as a link. It just appears on the page to add a bit of content to it. And here's some functional images. These are very commonplace social media links. These are in the footer on most pages on the Eon Energy website, and we'll take a look at that in just a second. So there's the Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn icons there, and many people will be familiar with those. And for functional images, it's important that the text alternative describes the image function. In this case, where the image link is going to. Facebook for Eon Energy, Twitter for Eon Energy, or LinkedIn for Eon Energy. And the last use case we want to explore is that relating to informative images, but where they contain a rich amount of information. So a graph or chart is a prime example of that. Visually, the chart isn't very big, but it contains a lot of information, and it's very difficult to convey that level of and that amount of information in a very short amount of alternative text. So I'm just going to move on to how we can actually test for some of these issues, and I'll take some live examples from the Eon Energy website to illustrate some of these. Now, I'm going to be using this toolbar, the Web Accessibility toolbar. This allows you to extract various key bits of information from a web page, such as the page structure. It allows you to view the list of headings on a page, view all of the images on the page, and so on. So it's a very useful tool to use. I will make sure a link is sent around separately for this, but I'm just going to get on and start using the tool this time. The other tool which I can't demo in this context is the NVDA screen reader, and I use the screen reader myself to do a lot of testing with. It's invaluable for finding out how a blind user will interact with a page, and the NVDA screen reader is fantastic because it is completely free. It's open source, free, it works very well with Firefox, and whilst there are a lot of keyboard shortcuts needed to know it and to use it effectively, you can get by for testing purposes with very few keyboard shortcuts. So let me just move on to how to use the toolbar to test for some of these issues. Now, what I've done is create a list of useful shortcuts for me so I can demonstrate some of these use cases that I've just talked about. Okay, so on the Eon Energy homepage, we have these decorative images down here. So this one here, see if you could pay less, and inside our solar collaboration, this is the example that I used in the webinar just now. And I can see if I hover the mouse over it, that is not acting as a link. All it is adding some visual interest to the page above this section, see if you could pay less. Now, my primary concern with cosmetic images is that they are provided in such a way that assistive technologies can ignore them. So a screen reader user won't hear unnecessary content to them, which we would call audio clutter. So using the toolbar, the very first thing I'm going to do is actually just go to Images and Show Images. And that will give me an error message because there's some frames on the page. It's not really an error message, in fact, it's more just a summary of information on the page. But it gives me a list of the frames on a page and how many images are in each one. I'm going to close that and just go back to the page in question. And we can see, so if I just Alt-Tab back to the web page here, if I scroll where there were images, there are now a little hovering tooltip explaining the alternative text for those images. So what I would do is look down and make sure that alternative text makes sense. Now, for these images, there is no alternative text. Through a bit of deduction and from experience, I surmise that these have actually created as CSS background images. Now, I can confirm that just by going to the Images menu and going to Remove CSS Images, in which case they promptly disappear. Now, that is fine. For my purposes, that satisfies the query, are these going to be ignored by screen readers and assistive technologies? Because they are CSS background images, yes, they will be. Screen readers cannot see or interact with CSS images. There is no alternative text that can be provided for them. So using CSS in that way is a great way of providing decorative images that do not convey information. Okay, let's just go back to my list of images. So here we have an example of an informative image. Now, if I scroll down, here again is the example we just looked at, the up to 7% direct debit discount. And I can see if I move the mouse over that get an energy quote, that is actually a link, but the rest of the image is not. So I'm just going to see what alt text is exposed for that image. Again, it looks like these are CSS background images. So if I go to Images, remove CSS images, that information is gone. All that remains is get an energy quote. Now, that means that a screen reader user is going to have a different experience of this web page than a sighted user. A sighted user can read that extra information about the 7% discount for direct debits. A screen reader user, all they get is this get an energy quote. So that would be a problem that would need to be addressed. I've already explained that CSS background images are fine for decorative images, but in this case, it is not a decorative image. It actually conveys information. So we'll look at in a second how you can provide information in a text format, text alternative for users. But just suffice to say that CSS background images should be reserved purely for decorative images and not for information-rich images. So moving on to the third example, functional images. Now I've explained if we look in the footer on any Eon web page, we can find the social media icons. So if I scroll down, here we have Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn. Now let me again just show the alternative text for images. Let me scroll down, and actually if I zoom in a bit so you can see properly, and we'll complete that survey later, we can see Eon on Facebook, Eon on Twitter and Eon on LinkedIn is the alternative text value for each of those images respectively. Visually that conveys just the right amount of information. I expect as a sighted user, when I see the Facebook logo, if I click that link, it's going to take me to the Facebook page of the site I'm on, in this case, Eon. So in this case, the screen reader users are provided the exact same information as that for sighted users. So that's fine. In actual fact, this would be the best way of satisfying the issue up here, where the image conveys information to users. That should actually be marked up as a inline image using the alt attribute to add up to 7% direct debit discount on 1, 2, 3 year fixed price plans. So that is how we would provide that information to a user who cannot see the image. Let me just zoom out. And on to the last example would be rich images. So these are images that convey a lot of information. In this case, we have a chart down here. Now, it's very difficult because there's a practical limit of about 150 characters in the alternative text attribute of an image, the alt attribute. And in this case, there's so much information. How would you begin to describe it? Well, below this image, there's a useful summary. It says there's a mixed month, saw prices outturned slightly up on the last month. So it gives you a brief description of the trend line for gas and for power. Now, that's still conveying not as much information via text as there is in the chart itself. So in these cases, we look to provide a table of all of the data that was used to make up the chart, and that can be browsed by a screen reader user or other text-only user, and they can extract the information they need from that or what they want. But it is still useful to perhaps give a general indication of the chart itself. So a general comment on the trend line, where it's going, is it going up, is it going down, and so on, can only be useful. If users need to, they can look in the table for more information, but that gives them like a head start, if you will. So how do we provide text alternatives? Let me just go back. So how to test for non-text content issues. So providing a text alternative can be done via the alt attribute. That is the very simplest way of doing it. So here we have an example from the search page, and this actually uses a slightly different technique, but it serves this example well. We use an image for the search button. It's just a magnifying icon. Many sighted users will be familiar with that and know and expect something to happen when they click that. They would expect the search to happen. So for a screen reader user, we would just use the alt value of search. That just tells users, they will be told it's a button, and that just announces that it's a search button. For decorative images, providing a blank alt attribute will just tell users that it can be ignored. So screen reading software will ignore the image and not read anything out to the user. And that's a really good way where you have cosmetic images, which we've looked at. Alternatively, as I've already explained, CSS background images are ideal for marking up decorative images. And in the case of rich images, providing text alternative is best done via a table where you can provide the underlying tabular data that is used to create that image. So I've just given a quick example here of what a table might look like. It's a very simple table. It only contains 2 columns and 1 row, or 1 data row in any case. You would want to provide a somewhat larger table for that image of a chart on this page. So there'd likely be a row for each month from March 2014 to March 2015. So it would be a somewhat bigger table, but then users who cannot see the chart can actually just read the data directly from the table, and they can make up their own mind as to the trend line and get information out which otherwise might not be available to them. So that's a brief overlook of the key aspects and issues affecting non-text content such as images. Just moving on to talk about now about pre-recorded audio only and video only. Now this is something that's fairly rare to come across, because recorded audio only would be something like a podcast or a short snippet of a radio interview perhaps. There is no video, it is pure audio. And video only is a video with no audio track, which again are fairly rare. Where we tend to find videos, we tend to find videos with a soundtrack. But there are some specific requirements to be aware of when we talk about audio only and video only content. So, as with images, not all users can perceive content. By providing content in a variety of formats is useful because it allows users to choose the most appropriate for them. Blind users can perceive audio, and deaf users can perceive text, but it doesn't work the other way around. And deaf-blind users with Braille output, so if they can't hear or see the screen, they can still make use of text alternatives, which can be turned very simply into Braille via a Braille output device, like a Braille display for those users. Now, there weren't any examples that I found on the Eon Energy website. As I said, a typical example would be a podcast, a recorded radio stream, something like that. And an example of a video without a soundtrack might be a demonstration of how to set up a new meter, how to pay a bill on a website, or so on. But how do you then evaluate this checkpoint? Really, you're looking for any audio only or video only content and seeing if there is a text alternative on the page that gives the same information. In the case of an audio podcast or something similar, a suitable alternative for just audio would be a transcript that would cover the dialogue in a podcast, or the dialogue between two people in a recorded interview. And for a video without a soundtrack, the best way of providing an alternative is to actually include a soundtrack that describes what's going on in the video, or by providing a text alternative describing the video contents. And in many cases, that would just be a transcript which gives information not only on what is being spoken in the video, but also what is happening in the background in terms of background information, somebody writing on a board, somebody being introduced and their name flashes on screen, etc. Okay, moving on to captions. Captions are something we're probably all familiar with regards to video content. Captions are really useful for people who cannot hear, who are deaf or have low hearing, and captions convert all of the spoken text into on-screen text for them. So captions are actually required for all pre-recorded audio content, and actually there is a secondary requirement that live audio content has captions as well. This is a very rare occurrence. It's very rare that you get live audio or live video streams on websites, but if you do use those at all, it is important that you consider captioning those. And that can be quite challenging. Live captioning is a challenging exercise. There are specialist companies that do that. And if it is something you look into, you will likely need to source the expertise of one of these companies. So why are captions important? Well, users who cannot perceive the audio content of a video, so users who are deaf, still need to have access to the underlying information within that video. Now, this will be users who cannot hear the screen or cannot hear the content, but people without speakers as well, people in a noisy office will also benefit from captions. Now we can see in this example on the right there are some captions on the screen, and actually that's a very well captioned video. How do you test for captions? Well, in many video players there is a CC, which stands for closed captions button in the video player. In the case of the YouTube player, which is used throughout the Eon Energy website, the captions button is slightly different. I've highlighted it on the example here. It's just a button that appears to have a few lines of text on a white screen. That just indicates you can use it to toggle captions on or off. So how do you evaluate it then? First of all, you find video content and then you enable captions if there is a button. And what you're looking for is that the captions are actually properly synchronized with the on-screen action. So when somebody's speaking, the actual caption that describes what they're saying appears at the right time. You're looking that all of the content is captioned. So a good example would be if somebody is introducing somebody else, not only is what they're saying as a person captioned, but their introduction for the other person is also captioned as well. It's important that users have that consistency between what's going on the screen and what they're hearing. And also that all of the captions are correct. So you will need to watch through a significant length of video sometimes to check that all of the captions are correct. It may be if you've used auto captioning for anything, that can sometimes misinterpret words and cause a problem. So you do need to check that captions are correct. Some good practice relating to captions which might be useful. They benefit from having a sans serif typeface, so one such as Arial, as used within this webinar. You should always use sentence case, which means just initially capitalizing the first word, using appropriate punctuation, and using bold text instead of italics for emphasis, just because that comes across better on most screens. And really just follow the conventional rules of the language you are using in terms of structure, when to use speech marks, apostrophes, and other punctuation. And for contrast, because you're conveying text over a moving background, you should provide a solid black background on which you should use a light, for instance, white color to color the captions. That just ensures they're readable regardless of what content is going on in the background behind the captions. So moving on to success criteria 1.2.3, audio description or media alternative. And this is described as there is an alternative for time-based media or audio description of the pre-recorded video content is provided for synchronized media, except when that media is an alternative to text that is already on the page. So by pre-recorded video content, it's just talking about video content with a soundtrack, and it's saying that there should be an audio description as well. Now, what does that actually mean? An audio description is something that describes things that users who are only listening to the video and not seeing it may otherwise miss out on. So, for instance, that might be visual content in the background. That might be somebody writing out instructions on a bit of paper which they do not speak aloud. Now, that's fine for sighted users. They can see those instructions, but a vision impaired, a blind user who cannot see the screen will not ever know that someone is writing those instructions or what those instructions are. Now, there are two success criteria related to that. I've just stepped onto the next one, audio description for pre-recorded. So at level A, you just need to do either a text alternative or an audio description. So you could get by with providing a transcript at level A. However, level AA compliance requires you to provide a audio description regardless. So you must provide an audio description if relevant for a video if you want to achieve AA compliance. So why are audio descriptions important? If there's visual content that's not announced to a user, that means that user will miss out on the content if they cannot see the screen. So in this example, the video title, How to Choose the Right Products and Services, appears visually on the page, but a user who cannot see the screen is never told of that announcement. So as soon as that title disappears, somebody comes on and there is some dialogue which is all captioned, but a user who cannot see the screen will never be told that that is the title of this video. So in that case, it just requires somebody to say that out loud really at the same time as it's displayed on the screen. That would be the easiest way of satisfying this. As we'll look at on the next slide, you can actually provide a separate audio description layer, but it's often easier just to incorporate any audio descriptions into the existing audio track. So how can you test this? Look for any video content, and then you need to watch through it and pay attention for any content that is displayed only visually but not described audibly. So a key example, as I've just indicated, is the title for a video. Often if you're interviewing people in a video, their name, location, their position within a company are displayed as subtext on the screen, but it may not be announced. And that's something else that blind users will miss out on. So if the content that's being displayed visually is key to understanding the video, it should be covered by an audio description. Now, some video players may actually have, in the same way they have a captions button, they may have an audio description button, which allows a separate audio description track to be included with the video, but the YouTube player does not have that. So if you're going to be using the YouTube player for your video content on your site, the best way to incorporate an audio description track is to include it with the existing audio track. So how can you implement a good audio description? If there is enough blank time, sufficient pauses in the existing audio stream, you can include additional information there. So that does rely on there being a good enough pause between people speaking that you can include information on what's going on in the background. If not, you will need to provide a separate audio description track. So you can get specialist media players. There's one called the JW media player, and that allows you to choose from multiple audio streams. You can just see on the screenshot on the right, users are choosing between the English, Spanish, or a specialist commentary English soundtrack for that sample video. So that's how you might want to include an audio description. Okay, moving on to audio control, and this is more about content that will be distracting for some users than content that needs an alternative. So the W3C described this as if any audio on a web page plays automatically for more than 3 seconds, either a mechanism is available to pause or stop the audio, or a mechanism is available to control the volume independently from the system volume. So what does this mean? Well, screen reader users rely on their screen reader speaking content out to them to interact with a website. If they land on a page such as a YouTube page that starts playing content automatically, they will find this very distracting, and they'll have to navigate a page listening to both the video content or audio content on top of listening to their screen reader, which makes the whole process very difficult and sometimes impossible. So for that reason, this requirement is that if you have any auto-playing content on a website, it stops after 3 seconds, and the user can then choose to carry on if they want to, but typically just stopping after 3 seconds is sufficient. The only way around this is by, if you have content that plays for longer than 3 seconds, then the very first control on the screen is one to stop that audio, and that's going to be used primarily by screen reader users. So because the audio content that plays in this way is actually going to be distracting and frustrating for many users, not just screen reader users, our general advice is to avoid doing that full stop. Do not have autoplay videos. Instead, have videos that will play in response to a user interaction, such as pressing a button. So how can you test this? Very simply, if you've got headphones or a speaker rigged up to your computer, just browse through the pages you're testing and then listen out for any audio that plays automatically. This is more typically found on web pages that incorporate video, such as YouTube embedded pages or YouTube content that's been embedded, but it's very quick to check whether a page has audio that plays automatically. Just go onto a page, wait longer than 3 seconds. If any auto-playing audio is stopped by then, that's fine. If it's still going, you then need to check, is there a method to stop the audio as the very first control on the page? If there is, that's fine, as long as it works. If there is no method to stop the audio, then that would be a failure. Okay, moving on to success criteria 2.3.1, 3 flashes or below. In the same way that audio content can be distracting for vision impaired and blind users, this success criteria has a very specific demographic it's aimed at. So content that flashes at a certain frequency or between a certain frequency range has the potential to trigger a seizure in somebody with photosensitive epilepsy. So that's why this checkpoint exists, is to prevent content like that appearing on websites. Now, it's very difficult to evaluate manually because content flashes at a very specific rate and our eyes are not set up to evaluate that sort of frequency. So there is a tool which we can use to evaluate this type of content automatically. It's called PEAT, which stands for Photosensitive Epilepsy Analysis Tool. That's a free tool developed by Wisconsin University. They have an R&D department who do a lot of work with accessibility and disability. And you can see a screenshot of that software on the right hand side, and I'll make sure a link is sent round to this separately. But you can use this to actually record the entirety of a web page. So if a web page has got animations on it or it's got embedded video, you can actually record a video of that page, and then this software will analyze it and it will tell you whether it is a pass or a fail against this checkpoint. This is not the sort of thing I would ever expect people to evaluate manually. It's very difficult to make a judgment call on how fast something is flashing, and other factors such as the size of the flashing area also need to be taken into account as well. So using this tool makes testing it a lot easier. How can you avoid flashing content? Well, wherever you have videos have the potential to include flashing content. The same is said for Flash-based content as well. Flash is now going out of fashion. It's not used nearly as widely, but Flash demonstrations, Flash movies, flash animations and so on, can all be a potential cause of flashing content. Really, you should be issuing guidance to people who produce content and source videos for your site on how to identify flashing videos, how to use the photosensitive epilepsy analysis tool to check videos before they get to the website. And you should also be especially careful when linking to third-party videos, because they can, of course, they will be unvetted generally by yourselves. They may change very soon, or when you're not expecting it. So it's best to avoid those if at all possible, and just produce your own content, or at least if you're using third-party content, embed it on your own site so you're using a known version of it and that has been vetted by you. Okay, well that was a quick fire run through of the key issues to do with multimedia accessibility. I hope this has been useful. If you do have any questions or feedback, please do contact your line manager, who can pass queries along to us and we can get back in due course. Thank you.